Matt. Good to see you. I thought we'd take a little bit of a trip down memory lane. Um, Let me start by saying, would you agree that we're both outsiders?
Absolutely.
How would you define an outsider?
Whatever standard narratives are out there, at least in our discipline, we almost can't help but not follow along with them.
That's a good description. But what I think is remarkable about you, or certainly different about you than me, is that at the same time you're an outsider, you're an insider in many senses. You're employed and you collaborate with people. That's an important ingredient in your whole shtick. So let me take a step back. One of the ways that we're outsiders, you and I have pretty instinctually similar reactions to many things. It's just in our gut for some reason, even though we're from different generations and backgrounds. Both you and I have always rejected the standard drug control narrative, which is, can you pick up on that for a second?
Drugs do something to the wiring in your brain to make you do something. And then in that case, the person who uses drugs too often or overuses drugs is in effect sick and can't control it.
And as a result, we share, coming from different backgrounds, a different approach to how you deal with drug problems. I recently had an unnerving interview where a guy interviewed me, supposedly because he liked the life process program. He was really focused on the group part of it. I think he came from an Indian background where drinking was verboten. And when he came to the US, um, that was a bad mix up. And he needed to get into a facilitative drinking group. So we got to a point where we started discussing preventing drug problems. And I maybe asked him how he would do it with his kids. And he said, well, I would tell them about the dangers of drugs and, warn them about, and I go, I don't know if you've been listening to our interaction up till now, but the Life Process program is about how negative relationships arise out of failures of basic life functions. So his narrative, it was concerned drinking, uh, but you can see the direct parallel to drugs. So, can you recount somehow? I mean, I don't think it was an odd selection. You were picked. You became a part of your county task force during the peak of the drug overdose and death epidemic. Can you background us on that?
I was thinking about I'm going to try my best. You might like I kept you updated along the way. You might actually have a better true memory of what happened than me, but from my recollection, I was actually on the board, on a board that had to do with stakeholders in child development and early education in the state of Vermont. And we had visitors one day at the board meeting introducing themselves as the Chittenden County Opioid Alliance, CCOA. And as we were talking about drugs and drug health and addiction, I shared a bit of a perspective, and it wasn't a totally go along perspective, but it wasn't a big pushback. Don't remember what it was. I
I mean,
think
you
I
didn't say, I think we should have kids take drugs and learn
no,
that.
right, right. I didn't, and I certainly didn't even say anything that um nobody got upset about what I was saying, but I did say, I like to consider different angles on this. There's some form of, and when the question came up, well, what makes you think that? I said, well, one good reason is because I went through it. I had a heroin addiction. I got over it, and I'm trying to look now at why that would have happened, thinking like I'm a special case. But I'm finding That's more like the norm than anything. So that was my statement. It didn't go very far, except that the folks from the Chittenden County Opioid Alliance stayed after that meeting and asked, "Would you consider being on our board?" Um, I said we could talk about it later. I let them meet me at my work a few days later, and when they showed up, I invited them into my office and said, "How are you doing?" And then when they asked me to be part of the board, I said, "I don't know if you want me to be part of your board." Um, I think
You forewarned them.
I did. Maybe you might have the wrong reasons, so maybe you should know a little bit more about me. And I discussed a little bit, and they were all good with that. And I think all good with what? Well, they were all good with me saying, um, I think in our community, but I mean nationwide, but in our community, when we're having conversations about drugs and drug addiction, we're thinking of it as drug centered, right? Like the Chittenden County Opioid Alliance. We're concerned about opioids. The drugs are doing something. And I don't think the drugs are doing something. I think people have circumstances that they're living through, better or worse. That was the case for me. And so what I wouldn't want to be is the person on your board who fits the what do you call it? Fits the mold for person who has personal experience. I don't want to be a poster child for a
You don't
narrative.
choose to identify yourself. I'll take a little sidebar here. You don't call yourself recovered. You're kind of taking normal human being route. You're kind of saying, well, here I am. And for better or worse, I have a family, I have a job. I'm just going to go with me
Right,
now
right.
rather than ex addict me.
That's it. And they were cool with that. I don't know how far you want me to get. I guess the last part I'll say is I think they were cool with that because of this idea that all approaches are equal in opioid like groups. So it's good to get a range of experiences and thoughts, which is different. Well, that
I
means
would
different
think it
things.
I would think it almost goes beyond that.
Hmm.
I would almost think that a statement you would make or that you remember making, well, I really think to look into conditions that lead to a human being to be accessible to addiction in my own life or other people's lives. Most people would say, yeah, we
Right.
agree with you. So let's move forward. You are now a part of the task force. Is that the right word?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
And about how many people are in the task force?
Gosh. I think in all groups, I think there were three tiers to that group: a tertiary group, a primary group, and so I think there were 50 total. There may be even more.
So it's a, medium, I don't know, 18, medium sized group. So I visualize this because I know a little bit about your work. Um, so everybody sort of endorses your point of view as being very sensible. But when push comes to shove, it turns out that's seemingly modest suggestion that everybody would agree to, and everybody in the drug policy field would agree. Nora Volko would agree with it. But when push comes to shove, you're in a different ballpark. Am
Yeah.
I go with that a little bit?
Well, uh, it, any the general statement, I think that drug use or overuse or um, addictive style use comes with a range of life experiences and reasons. That was accepted, but any statement that would confirm that point is too annoying to talk about. So I remember
So, tell me what you mean by that. Fill that in.
so a doctor came and gave a lecture to the group, um, and the doctor read statistics. God, I have to remember this. I wrote a little piece about it. Um, he Suffice it to say, the statistic was real, but skewed in the favor of the narrative that people who use opioids are going to become addicted to them. And I made the statement that if you flip that number around and ask the real question, well, of the people who use opioids, how many people tend to become addicted to them? Your own number is saying very few. I don't remember what I would be such a killer line if I could remember it. Um,
I mean, I've been in a similar position, and we've written about it. Most people who take opioids don't become addicted,
mhm.
and most people become addicted, which you could speak to, but that's not why you were there to stop being addicted at some point. So let me just, is my picture coming across the
Yeah,
screen?
yep,
What?
yeah, it's coming across fine.
So everybody says, "Oh, we agree with him, Zach," but then when you're in an actual face to face, it's sort of like gunfight at the OK Corral. Uh, Wait a second, what are you saying? And what you're saying, well, most people don't become addicted to opioids. You need an extra layer in there to say what draws them to that experience in a negative and expanding way.
Right.
And then people go, eek! When they hear that laid out like that, especially if you're disagreeing with some medical authority, people are taken aback. Is that a fair description of the dynamic?
Yeah, it was more. It's yes, that's a fair description. The answers that I got, if I talked about data or asked the question about what a number means, or asked the question about if we're framing this in the way that we really want to frame it, the answer always came back in the form of anecdote. So the answer to a numbers problem could be something like, well, in my practice, you have to understand, I've seen hundreds of patients who blah 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 blah, which doesn't tell us anything about the general number they
So
were saying.
that's an ironic thing. I'm just going to take a side trip. The data people come in and tell bullshit stories. That always happens.
Yeah,
I've been on a lectern with a guy who says, well, when you talk about our experiences being addictive, um, that's uh, that's psychological addiction, not physical addiction. And I say, how did you come to that distinction? Where does that come up? And then he says, well, you have withdrawal. I said, well, people withdraw from relationships and sometimes they kill themselves or the other partner. Would you call that withdrawal? And uh, they say, and they'll mention tolerance. And I'll say, well, what about people who can't separate themselves from another person and they, spend more and more time, even though it's destructive? So they have all fabricated criteria, which they claim is scientific, but which is total folklore. Let me jump one step back now. So you might be seen as being getting in trouble now in that you're sort of disputing their fundamental narrative. But you do that well. Let me take one step back. What I think I know about you is that you're a participant, have been in student evaluation groups, assessment groups, where a kid, teenager kid, he's obviously having a problem. That boom. And then they do an assessment and they come in with a brain scan and they start talking about frontal lobes and all. And you're in this group and they're going on about that. Let me just jump in and answer another question. While that's going on, what are you thinking and how are you feeling when that discussion is happening? The brain
well,
scan discussion.
well, it was only one time that really did happen. That we say a lot. You and I say a lot. People are never diagnosed based on a brain scan, which is still true. It was brought up in a conversation once about the extent to which a student could participate in learning, and the argument about why not to participate in more learning was, no, it's legit. She has a neuroscientist did a brain scan of her. Like part of her brain isn't developed the right way. Um, So that really only happened one time, and I was in shock about that. We can't. I don't know what to tell somebody except that I'm looking at what's in front of me, and
Now,
I
are
could.
we back to your student evaluation, or are we in the drug
Well,
committee?
I'm answering the student question, even though they sound similar.
Okay, okay.
When people come with diagnostics in general, especially if somebody comes with a brain scan. I mean, unless somebody says, I mean, the brain scan would be good if we were saying, "Hey, this person isn't even opening her eyes. What's going on with that?" And then the person says, "Well, she had a traumatic brain injury. That might account for it." And we'd say, "Oh, well, that makes sense." Right? That would do something for me, but it never diagnostically when somebody
And
says,
there is no such thing. We're not going to get into that. That's another video. So my
here's the
impression
oh,
is,
yeah.
but you're employed, and so you would say something like, "I wasn't there. Uh, has anybody?" And the kid has a problem. That's how he's in this thing. And you say, "Well, has anybody talked to the kid?"
Yeah.
Go and you take it from there.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't know how to talk except for what I can see in front of me. Like I know the kid. I've watched the kid. I've talked to the kid. I mean, now we want to know more information about the kid and what they can do.
And then in the
The
group,
crazy question always. I mean, this was so annoying. Well, has anyone tried talking to him?
right.
And people, well, what do you mean tried talking to? We interact with them all the time. And I said, no, I mean the question that you're asking. Have you asked this question to the kid? And the answer was usually no. And there usually was an answer about the system not accounting for it, or that's not how we do things. And I always said, well, why? And if people said, well, because, then I just talked to the kid. And so I would do the talking to the student, and then I would come back to the meeting with student input.
So that's back to your job or some past job.
Right.
And you, generally speaking, are a gainfully employed human being. People like having you. And it's almost like they say, "Oh, great. Zach is going to talk to the kid.
Right.
We have this brain scan." And then Zach will know, like, have something to do with the kid. So it's sort of like you're useful.
Right.
And so, in general, now we're going to jump to the county group. Um, there's no specific individual that you're dealing with that you can't cure anything. You're a board member. You're not going to do anything in the county. So when this type of discussion comes up, and the guy talks about brain scans or whatever he's talking about, and if you come across with another point of view, uh, how would an interaction like that go?
Um, it would either be let's see. It was never completely adversarial. I was usually just asking the question, like, we can ask questions around here. Usually, a point back to me would be something that was narrative driven and anecdotal. And I would say something back like, well, let me say it this way. I remember being at a presentation about smoking being harmful when I was in middle school. Follow me on this one. And there was a kid in the audience saying, well, smoking's not bad. My grandpa smoked. He's 93 years old, never had a problem. And so to the person presenting this data, when I asked a data question, I was no different to them than the kid in the audience saying, "My grandpa's fine, he smokes and blah 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 blah." They think what I intuit from that conversation is you think I'm trying to change your narrative around. Well, I kind of am. So the what I would explain, well, what I'm trying to do is, from my understanding, even though we have a problem, people are dying and overdosing. It seems like we should get a good footing on that problem. And I'm wondering if it helps to know that a lot of people actually take opioids and they're not having a problem with them. That might give us some That might give us some information about why people are having a hard time with them. That usually wasn't answered. I mean, it was usually a non sequitur sort of an answer that led right back to anecdote. Like, yes, some people can take them. Everyone, tons of us have had painkillers for operations and things like that, but it's just not the same as the people who are doing drugs and or seeking them and then they continue doing them or have had a hip surgery and can't get off of them. Why it's not the same, I don't know. We never got that far. The conversation usually couldn't last that long.
At the risk of overextending, this is so enjoyable. I was once on a radio interview, and it was in Washington, D.C., and they were interviewing a star football player on their team.
Mm.
And I did my shtick. It was almost, we weren't in the same room. It was a phone interview. And the guy who was just there as a football player said, well, let me tell you a story. My grandfather smoked his whole life. And when I graduated high school and I got a scholarship to college, he was like in his 60s or 70s. And he said, I'm going to stop smoking because I don't want to die and miss you performing as a star. And so the guy who's telling the story had nothing to do with addiction. You know what I mean? But it was a whole different experience. And he was a case study sitting there. So my grandfather had smoked for 45 years and he quit smoking. And, you know, he lived 20 more years. He got to see me get drafted and become a pro and everything. Uh, so now back, we're going from the classroom to the group. In the classroom, they can foist it off on you. In the group, they're going back to these anecdotes, and you're not feeling good about your participation in the group.
No, I wasn't.
Maybe describe that internal feeling. You're not a guy who goes around, you're not belligerent. And it's sort of like they're respectful of you. They're not saying you're an idiot.
Right. Well, my idea was this is my community. This is where people work and it's where people live. And my inclination has always been that it's better to be part of if for problem solving sake. If I want to solve a problem in the community, I got to do it with my community members. And so that was good for me. I knew it was a little bit tough to engage. So my thinking was I can do this until it too much of a headache maybe, but I had conversations individually with people that where we could go the distance. It wasn't super annoying to them. They would take a point and say, "Well, I got to look into that." It was interesting conversation. But as a group, our group mindset was we're actually what we're supposed to be doing is let's collect data and see if we can make sense of what our problem is here. And then based on the data, let's do a sort of a press campaign to let people know what precautions they could take or what they can do. What that turned into was let's find data that makes our story look right, our pre-written narrative look right.
Which tends to be alarmist data. That's the way you want to go with the media.
Totally alarmist. Yeah, and we all have to stop what we're doing. Tell your kids not to do drugs. Tell everybody not to do drugs. Stop. Doctors need to stop prescribing drugs. This is all too much. Um, and that I think is what got me is that I thought I'd be able to do part of the outreach process where I could say the things that I believed, and I would have at least a partner or two who would do that with me. What it turned
In this group.
in the group, yeah. What it turned into was that our group decided nothing. Our group made the decision about what we wanted to say, and then we looked for data that would help, that would look like it confirms it. And then as a group, we were told, well, here's what, based on all this, here's what we should put out to social media or media if you're interviewed or in the newspapers. It was very discouraging The
I'm going to jump to the end. You're a
guy.
community guy. You don't look for a fight. You quit.
I did.
At the risk of taking, I mean, I'm just going to tell a whole other story. I was famous for gambling addiction. There's a journal, Gambling Addiction, and they knew about me. And in the very first journal article, I wrote about how gambling could be addictive. So in Canada, uh, they have gambling, legal gambling, and they have to put a certain amount of money into stuff, remedial stuff. So they have a big, well funded annual conference, and they invited me. And the guy gave a speech, and his speech showed a kid who had gotten addicted to gambling, and they showed a video of the kid running up with a big sledgehammer and smashing the video thing. And I'm watching this, and the data are that most kids don't become addicted to gambling, and that they could gamble at 18, which is already illegal in the U.S., just like drinking
Mm,
in much of Canada. And the data are, like everything, a few kids become addicted to it, but most kids, even if they have a bad night, they say, oh, this isn't for me. So I had a small work breakout group, and I told that story, and I said, well, I guess what this group has learned is that scare tactics work in drugs. Let's do it with gambling,
right.
even though your own data, they have national studies that showed that most 18-year-olds who gamble didn't become addicted. Um, and I gave that. And then there was a dinner. It was a beautiful hotel. And the dinner was in a turret. And when I arrived, somebody said, oh, you're not sitting at the speaker's table, which is a
Interesting.
bad sign.
Yeah.
So I said, whatever, I mean, the people I sat with were great. The dinner we had salmon, it was great. On the way out, I saw that guy who gave the keynote address. And I go, he was at Boston University. I go, hey, I'll make up a name. Phil, how's it going? And he turned on me, like a cornered snake. And he says, you think it's funny you come up here and you lay this thing, on my trip, where you kind of publicly deride and undercut everything I'm doing. And you think you're just going to fit right in and everybody's going to be fine with it. And I said, hey, take it easy, buddy. Good to know you. So that's an experience that I have had. You don't have that kind of experience. Uh, in this experience, you just quit.
Yeah. I don't let it linger that long, like there's in to some extent I agree, I still read parts of your memoir sometimes, and I liked reading it. And I like the parts where you think you go overboard and where you think you did just right. Either way, your method is, how can I not tell the truth? I'm going to say true things. It's going to make people feel really uncomfortable, and it's the truth. What do I do about that? Um, Mine is tell the truth. Certainly don't lie. Certainly don't get caught up in a narrative. But if the conversation is at the point where I detect it's no longer a conversation where we're interested in one another, I stop the conversation. Or in this case, in this group, I wasn't I wasn't seeing eye to eye with. I was doing more of the effort seeing eye to eye with members than they were willing to do with me. And when that happens, I can't proceed. It's only going to get worse. So I'm out.
Were you angry? Were you aggravated?
Yeah, I was I was aggravated. I guess at no particular person. I was aggravated that, I felt like it was a good not good. It was a microcosm for what's happening nationally, or you could say around the world with our thinking about addiction. Um, I'm a community member who people ostensibly value, and so I want to be a part of a community effort. and there's no place for me or my thinking in my own community's effort. So that was very frustrating. Yeah.
Now I would we've been talking a little while. I don't want to go on too long. I mean, you do make a contribute. Well, you have a job, you work with kids, but this is a policy group. I mean, this
Right.
county group is going to do something bigger than you can personally do.
Right.
And obviously, you work with the life process program. And we write things, and we're doing this video.
Yeah.
Um, and the fact that we're outside is a certain number of people will say, well, you really helped me. Or a certain number of people will say, I never heard your point of view before. I'm going to commit to it. Um, we're not going to convince the universe, though, are we? You think?
No, I don't think so. No, I don't think we are. But I don't know any other direction to turn except for doing the next right thing in my mind.
Now, I have, right. You don't limit it's fair to say you don't limit yourself. You
Hmm.
don't say, well, I'm not going to try and change this big picture, but I'm not, let's be realistic. It's going to be slow going.
As you pointed out, I've been able to weasel myself into positions where people come to me for advice about topics. And when they do that, they're listening to me. And when they are, we're making headway. That's worked in the life process program with folks who have been peeved with AA or being told that they have a disease or have to take medications. And that's worked for me when people seek my advice when it comes to their kids or how they're doing in school or what steps to take next. So a person or a small group at a time, I feel like I can make headway. When it comes to making bigger policy decisions, that's a different story.
Well, you're a young man, so I got, there's a world famous addiction figure I know for decades. She's more famous than me. Um, she declined. She has written blurbs for my books, but she declined to write a blurb for my memoir, uh, A Scientific Life on the Edge. But when people who were close to her, friends or others, need addiction coaching, she puts me in connection with them. And she will have a standard thing. She said, well, I'm writing another book. I want to quote you. What's a good quote? And I think to myself, you can't, she's a brilliant woman. You can't summarize my point of view and describe it yourself. On the other hand, no greater love hath the woman. She's her good friends or some clients she has who are running up against the wall. She puts them in touch with me. And she's done that more than once. So she values me. But somehow she can't fit that into some, and her point of view is fairly similar to mine. She can't fit that into my kind of approach to things.
It's
So,
almost like a nice way to say it, if I were in her mind, would be the nice way, would be I don't like how he does his public interactions or engagements or arguments. I don't want to align myself with someone who argues that way publicly. But the guy's right. So, give it to him. Another way she might say it is, he's an asshole, but I guess I got to listen to him. You know what I mean? Uh,
this person was interviewed in a national hookup by a very famous person. And then he said, well, people don't get over addiction. And this woman, you can read my memoir about it, said, well, that's not true. I mean, she's not dumb.
mhm.
And then I thought, if I were there And then they went on to the next, boom. If I were there, I would have made such a pain in the ass to myself. I would say to the interviewer, who's a very well regarded journalist, a very independent minded thing. What makes you say that nobody gets better from addiction? I happen to know that he used to be a pothead when he was a kid in school. What makes you? Why don't? And you do? He does pay attention to research. What makes you say that people don't? Don't you know people who've quit smoking? And then I would just, I know I would, what I would do, I'd say, I would turn to the audience. It was in front of an audience. By the way, would people here have a hazardous guess about what's the hardest addiction to quit? And overwhelming to get the right answer, smoking. Then I would say, has anybody here quit smoking? And then a bunch of people would raise their hand. And then I would turn to this person and I would say, how could you be so mistaken about something which is present all around you? All you have to do is look and speak. And so my bottom line for all this is, well, you can see why I don't get invited many places. You know what I mean?
Right.
And let's bring it to an end. Do you have a well, in the life process program, what we're trying to do, but we present ourselves to various organizations, and some of them are sympathetic to us. They deal with marginalized populations. They deal with homeless populations, housing insecure, or they're Canadian or Australian. In the United States, everybody, Nora Volko, would agree with when you say, well, I don't think focusing on the drug is the best way to go. You really need to focus on the human environment. Everybody would say, right. And then if they'd say, well, we're going to give out some opioids, salute, they've got a lot of money from the drug companies and they're funding all kinds of projects. If we were to show up and describe the life process program, they go, eek! You know what I mean? What are you talking about? But that we're trying to do that where we're accessible. You're working with a Canadian group that focuses on marginalized groups, inner city health, and we're trying to partner with them. We have a meeting with them tomorrow, and so the way our goal, I'm getting a little advanced in years, you're younger, is that we'll demonstrate in this kind of an approach such success that we'll be able to market it in a broader context worldwide. Why don't you close off our little discussion about our personalities and our life and times?
Well, I like that you said that that's the goal because that means we're aligned and we agree. Like we're putting our money where our mouth is. We're putting it to the test. We want to use our philosophy in order to help as many people as we can. And it becomes so successful that what can you do? It's a successful philosophy. Why would we not want to help more people? I want to tell you, I don't remember his name, Incel, the NIDA, he was formerly head of NIDA. Um, and then he wrote a memoir talking about everything that they got wrong for dozens of years in psychiatry. Boy, I can't
Oh
remember the name.
yeah, oh he was the head of the
Is it
National.
Thomas Incel?
Yes.
So okay,
So he was the head of the National Institute of Mental Health.
well, that's right, that's right. But the point being that he retired, and somehow um, retroactively people always see what all these pockets of horrible mistakes that affected so many thousands of lives while they were working there. But I could only see it now that I'm retired. Um,
Thomas Instill, his name. You got that.
so
And he
I
actually sometimes sounded worse than us. He said, we spent $10
yeah,
billion on drug research. We didn't come up with one effing thing,
Right.
either diagnostically or treat. Not one.
So
We could have.
I will say something about how our personalities have melded together or found each other in a small way. Not only are we in the life process program rolling out our best capabilities for populations we think could really thrive on them and want to explicate what the good parts of our philosophy. Um, I'm working in the school system now. I intend to continue doing that. I always thought, well, I'm going to publish some book when I'm done working in the school system, because what's going to be in the book is not going to make me a very approachable person at work. Um, However, I'm not doing it that way. I've decided. I've started blogging. I've started a new podcast, and I will for eventually this will become a book about public schools and the way that we are rearing children and what's right about development and how we're doing it so wrong. And I have this all while I'm working in schools. So I'm trying not to make the mistake of somebody who retires and then tells the truth. I'm trying to be somebody in both dimensions of my working life who is trying to speak existence to the truth while I'm doing the work and forcing myself to continue working with the people who are uh, floundering in our systems.
That's brilliant, Zach. Brilliant. I'm sort of aware that you're doing that. I mean, I see the things that you're coming out with. I guess let me end this by saying, well, if anybody can do it, you can do it because you actually work in the school district where you live, and your daughter attends school. I
Yeah,
mean, you can't get more community than that. But yeah, but you didn't start out there working there.
right.
They hired you. They drew you in. They say, Zach, could you work with us? We know a lot about, you're in a larger community. Come and work with us. So, and you've done good work for them. They know that you're serious. Your own daughter goes to the school. You've done as much as you can to get people to with withdraw their claws and to see you in a beneficent, a benign way, helpful way. You couldn't do any more. And now you're pushing the limits about what you're saying about what they're doing. We'll revisit this in 10 years and see how it all
Yeah.
works out.
But, hopefully it works out well. But it's been great work. I've enjoyed all the parts of getting to collaborate with you because I feel like I'm doing the right thing.
You're living a good life, Zach. All right. Au revoir.
Thank you so much, Stanton.